Our first session, Think Asia, Think Hong Kong, will be chaired by Mr. Ronnie Chan. He is the chairman of Hang Lung Properties. Please be reminded that after we hear from the speakers, there will be a question and answer session. Please submit your questions to our staff using the note paper provided in your program. Be sure also to indicate your name. By way of introduction, Mr. Ronnie Chan is in the real estate and property investment, development, and management business. His company has been investing and building a number of world-class commercial complexes in China. He also co-founded a privately held company which has owned and managed business in several sectors, including manufacturing, media, healthcare, high-tech, and biotech. Mr. Chan is co-chair of the board of the Asia Society, and he's chairman of the Asia Society Hong Kong Center. I'd like to invite our panel chair, Mr. Ronnie Chan, along with the panel speakers, Dr. William Fung, Group Chairman of Li & Fung, Ms. Marjorie Yang, Chairman of Esquel Group, Mr. Stephen Bird, Chief Executive Officer, Asia Pacific, Citi, to come on stage. Mr. Chan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. This is wonderful to be here, knowing that Hong Kong is so much loved by everyone. There's no reason why anyone should not love Hong Kong. Hong Kong is one of the most lovable cities anywhere in the world. Of course, one of the reasons Hong Kong is so lovely is because Hong Kong is a city of immigrants. Not unlike the United States, this country is a country of immigrants. And immigrant cities or countries, history shows, always have the most vibrant economic systems because the people there are extraordinarily vibrant in many, many ways, like the Americans, and in my part of the world, like we honkies, as the Singaporeans call us. Well, Hong Kong is perhaps in another dimension rather unique. I cannot think of another city anywhere in the world where the East and the West blend together so well. And it is not just what you see in the film, which was fantastic just now, showing Hong Kong, but it is really in the people. I don't think that there are that many people in the world that can at the same time think like a Chinese and think like a Westerner. We are hardwired to think both in Chinese and in English. We have always been good. When China was a closed system, economically speaking, to the world, we were the gateway. Now that mainland China is open to the rest of the world, bingo, we win again. We win either way. And you will find no other place where you will have people which have hardwired into their system both the Chinese culture and the Western culture. And so today, I have gathered together here an excellent group of business leaders. Oh, by the way, let me add one more thing. You know, there's no other city in the world, I think there's hardly another city in the world, where within 5 hours of flight, you reach 40% of the world's population and 20-30% of the world's economic activity. Perhaps the only one that can claim the second one, that is, you can reach 20-30% of the world's economic activity, is perhaps New York and London and then Hong Kong. No other city anywhere in the world, within 5 hour flight, you can reach so many people and so much economic activities. So I'm delighted that today with us here, we have Dr. William Fung, we have Marjorie Yang, we have Stephen Bird. Many of you know William. William and his brother Victor has built up one of the most amazing companies in the world and is based in Hong Kong, the Li & Fung Group. And the Li & Fung Group is a leader conceptually as well as in practice of supply chain. I think in universities, a lot of professors, business professors talk about it. We in Hong Kong, such as William, they practice it. The only thing, William, is that you got the short end of the deal. Your brother think and talk, you think and work. But either way, you have built a fantastic company that is really a world leader, but there's a lot to it that you probably don't know. They own a lot of brands, for example. You probably don't know that. Margie, Hong Kong has wonderful business women leaders. and Margie is certainly one of them. Margie's company started manufacturing many things, including being one of the biggest shirt maker in the world. And then she is extraordinarily active in the mainland of China, growing long fiber, cotton, whatever, conserving water in Xinjiang, in the western part of China. Her nickname, by the way, is Queen of Xinjiang. Anyway, Princess. My mistake. And so the experience that these business leaders have is amazing. Then finally, we're Stephen Bird. Now, forgive Stephen. He speaks with a Scottish accent that you can hardly understand. I know in New York City you don't understand Scottish anymore, but Hong Kong having a history of being run by the Scots, we still have a few lingering and extraordinarily successful. And as the CEO of Citi in that whole part of the world, we have Stephen with us here today. So with that, let me turn over to William. William, tell us about Hong Kong, how you see it, and why is it so great. You can sit there, you can go there, doesn't matter. Whatever you like. Ladies and gentlemen, William Fung.
Ronnie, thank you very much indeed for that, shall I say, kind introduction. But of course, you're right. Many of you may know my brother Victor Fung. His name is Victor, starts with V, and V obviously stands for vision. So he's the visionary for our company. And my name is William, starts with W. You guys know what that means, right? He said already, work. Perhaps I'd like to confine my remarks, and I want to keep it short, to really 3 levels of looking at Hong Kong. I think I would like to share with you my view of Hong Kong in Asia, and then the view of Hong Kong as part of China, and finally as Hong Kong as a city in the Pearl River Delta, a very important city in a very important region in China. Now, let me just say that as our chief executive has so clearly laid out, as the economic center of gravity shifts somewhat from the west to the east with the rise of China and India and other Asian countries, okay, inevitably, Hong Kong's position then, is in question to the extent that there are many big cities in China, many big metropolitan cities in other parts of Asia and India. And so what is the role of Hong Kong? Well, very simply put, I think if I look at Hong Kong in the context of Asia, Ronnie has said it. Okay, Hong Kong is a center of Asia, to the extent that it's 5 hours flight to Japan, 5 hours, 4 or 5 hours to Singapore. You're almost within reach of all the major cities in China and so on. But really, that's not the point. Geography is one thing, but the key thing is actually our tradition, our experience. Hong Kong has had 170 years of Western-style capitalism and free markets. And the Hong Kong people and the people and the businesses in Hong Kong are extremely conversant with everything to do with Western-style capitalism, economies, and so on. And that made it a center, even in the old days, before China really opened up, as really the center for Southeast Asia. Our chief executive has mentioned it. Hong Kong was the unofficial capital of the overseas Chinese network for many years in the 50s and the 60s. Of course, when China opened up, that's another story which I'll talk about when I talk about China. So very much Hong Kong's basic strengths were built up along the lines of Western economic models. And Hong Kong used to say that we have 4 pillars in the Hong Kong economy. The first one is trading and logistics. Hong Kong continues to be a center of trading and logistics, and I'll tell you later why it's even enhanced with the opening up of China and other Asian markets. The second one is Hong Kong as a financial center. Again, the previous speakers, our chief executive, Jack, has all talked about, Hong Kong as being probably the 3rd largest capital market in the world right today. And Stephen certainly is our expert on that, and he'll talk about it. Okay. The third one is professional services. It has to do with the legal system, the accounting system, everything that you're familiar with in terms of working in business. Okay, Hong Kong has all the professional services you would need based on a common law system, which is readily understood by the whole world. And fourthly, tourism. Hong Kong is really the hub, both inbound, outbound from China. We have Peter Lam here, who's the head of our tourism association, and he's going to talk about that later today. So these are the 4 traditional pillars, and then we have some new pillars. which I won't go into, but it has to do with medical services, educational services, and of course the one that the chief executive did touch on is our creative industries, including the film industry. But the key thing is that because of those advantages, Hong Kong was and continues to be the center for Asia in many respects. And the geography plays a big role. We're obviously closer now to China, which I will turn to now. In order to understand Hong Kong's role, I think we've got to have some concept of how China has evolved. In our company, we have a very simple concept of China's evolution, modern China's evolution. For some reason, China seems to work in 30-year cycles. 1949 to 1979, that was the period from the founding of the People's Republic of China to Deng Xiaoping opening up China in 1979. In those 30 years, China was isolated. The world lost China. Hong Kong lost its hinterland. Hong Kong actually lost its raison d'etre. But Hong Kong industrialized and Hong Kong exported. And that became the foundation of the manufacturing and the export of labor-intensive consumer goods was the foundation of Hong Kong's industries. And it continues to be in a different sense, in the sense that we are now, as somebody said earlier, supply chain managers of that. And in that period, China wasn't a big factor. But Hong Kong was connected. Hong Kong was connected to the rest of Southeast Asia as north-south trade, again, the CE touched on. He gave a very comprehensive briefing to you already about all the advantages of Hong Kong. Okay, and as far as that 30 years are concerned, okay, that was a year of when the world did not have China. But from 1979 to 2009, okay, in those 30 years, China opened up. And as everyone here would know, it's probably the most incredible economic story of this century and the last. China opening up, created a total change in the balance of economic activity in the world. And China fulfilled its first promise, and there's a second promise. China fulfilled its first promise in those 30 years of becoming the world's factory. And Hong Kong became the manager of the supply chains that lead into that market, the sourcing part. And a lot of the Western companies, including American companies, including my company, benefited from China's opening up and becoming the manufacturing center of the world in many categories of consumer goods. And that everybody is familiar with. However, there's a change now. Starting really in 2009 to 2039, the next 30 years, I would predict that China is now going to fulfill its second promise, and that is to become the world's largest consumer market. Now, this started really with the 12th five-year plan. In the 12th five-year plan, there's a very clear switch in the way the leadership in China looked at China's growth and the growth engines that drive China's growth. And that is primarily switching from the export model, which it had done for the last 30 years before that, to really a model that's based on consumption, domestic consumption. That is just starting. That is just starting. It is already creating incredible opportunities for companies around the world and America. And in the next 30 years, when China becomes the world's biggest consumer market, and I think it will fulfill that promise at the end of this 30 years, it's already the second largest economy, but it lags the US still by far. And in terms of consumption, the numbers are actually simple arithmetic. A lot of people said that China is the world's biggest consumer market, maybe in some sectors now already, but it has a long way to go to catch up with the US, but the opportunity is definitely there. If you look at the simple arithmetic, US is a $15 trillion economy. China is about 7.5, half the size, even though it's the number 2 economy in the world. Secondly, consumption accounts for 70% of the US GDP. In China, it accounts for 35%, exactly half. So it's got a long way to go to catch up, but it's catching up very fast. In the 12th five-year plan, although China slowed its economic growth to something that is going to give China more inclusive growth, basically the economic growth in China is being slowed down to 7 to 8% in these next 5 years, in this 5-year plan. However, if you look at their projection, the Chinese 5-year plan projection for their retail market is going to grow at 15% a year for these 5 years, double the rate of the growth in GDP. So the opportunity is really there, and that is the big switch. The big switch from China being an export economy doing manufacturing to China now being an import and consumer economy. And that is the opportunity, I think, going forward, the big opportunity for China. And Hong Kong's role is very clearly going to be both now helping in the 30 years before sourcing from China to now the other way around, helping brands and companies and retailers go into China. And that is going to be a very clear opportunity for everyone here. Now, finally, even for those of you amongst here who say that, well, look, China's opened up, why do we need to go through Hong Kong? Why don't we go to China direct? Well, let me then analyze China in a little bit more detail and Hong Kong's role. A lot of people now, a lot of the newer thinking about markets in the world now have shifted from countries, which are political entities, to city clusters. That's the new way people are thinking about markets now. Not in terms of, I'm going to sell China, but I'm going to sell these city clusters in China. I'm going to sell these city clusters in the US and in Europe and so on. So you think more about markets in terms of city clusters. In China, the three big city clusters are Beijing and the Bohai area, the Beijing-Tianjin area, that's one area. The second one is Shanghai and the Yangtze River Delta, that's the second. And the third is the Pearl River Delta. And Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, that area. Okay, and in fact, because of the strange situation of one country, two systems, and Hong Kong is a bit different, although part of China, okay, people have always said that, okay, the biggest area must be the Yangtze River Delta, and then maybe the Bohai area, and then the Pearl River Delta. But they forgot Hong Kong. And our view is that Hong Kong is very much part of the Pearl River Delta nexus of markets, of a city cluster. If you include Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen together, that whole Pearl River Delta is by far the largest market in China. And that is Hong Kong's role if you now go down to the micro level. So I hope with those remarks, I think I'll set the stage for some questions and for my next speaker. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent. In case you don't believe what William has said, let me tell you. He talked about China increasingly becoming a consumption-led economy. Don't read newspaper in this country and believe it. Percentage-wise, because of necessity, in the short term, China is still investing, the government is doing a lot of public investment. But the reality is that private consumption has been growing by leaps and bounds. And I'm happy to say that my company, being in real estate, we built some of the best shopping malls in the world, not just in China, and they are doing such darn good business. Just one number. The busiest shopping center in this country is South Coast Plaza in Orange County. 23 million people a year. I have a shopping center that consistently have 70 to 80 million people every year. And so, and another one I built in Jinan, the first year I had 20 million, almost beating the busiest in the United States. And as you all know, they spend a lot of money. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. Okay, Margie, it's your turn. Tell us about how great Hong Kong is in relation to the mainland of China. Marjorie Yang.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be back in New York. William just told you a story about a company run by two brothers. And they think, they buy, they have a supply chain. So somebody's got to do the dirty work, right? Fortunately, my name doesn't start with D, but I'm the one doing the dirty work. I make for Li and Fung. In fact, there's always women standing behind these men. Ronnie, don't worry. I mean, I've been following around in Ronnie's footsteps for many years. I'm going to really keep my remarks very short because I've got three very intimidating big brothers that I have to be very careful. Can somebody tell Secretary Sanchez that I chair the Quality Migrant Program in Hong Kong and he can give me his application? The way Hong Kong stays vibrant is by being open and always trying to attract talent from everywhere. So, Secretary Sanchez, we look forward to having you in Hong Kong. Now, everybody knows about Li and Fung, everybody knows about Citibank, and everybody knows about Hang Lung, but I bet nobody knows what Esquel does. Well, I'm in the garment business and I make shirts. We start from farming or growing ginning cotton in Xinjiang to making the fabric in the southern part of China to sewing in China, Vietnam, Malaysia, and different countries. Well, for many years, our business didn't grow very fast because we were under quota. And then after quota was lifted, all of a sudden I realized that our business is starting to grow very fast. Now, when I looked at the numbers, I realized a large part of that growth is coming from our traditional customers like Polo, like William is one of my biggest customers, so I have to be careful about mentioning other names. All our existing customers have been growing, particularly in the China market, and therefore we have also benefited from this growth. And apart from using the traditional vendor source to support their growth in China, many of them are also using Hong Kong as a way of marketing their brand. Nobody can miss the huge A&F store in the central of Hong Kong, and nobody can miss the male models wearing very little. So Hong Kong has been very useful for these companies. How about for smaller guys? Well, people like Jeffrey Ronan, he runs a Hong Kong wine bar restaurant specializing in California vintages. In his words, Hong Kong is like New York. If you make it here, you can make it anywhere in Asia. There are many young people coming to Hong Kong, and it's quite interesting where you find them. I went to MIT, and one day I was visiting the science park, and there are so many alum with their startup companies from, I was particularly impressed by one guy who started this company making robots to help you go on a diet. And there are young people from all over the world, but many of the young people are from the US. And I think that they find Hong Kong a very easy place to live in. This morning I was talking to Jim Thompson, and I realized I must talk about this. Hong Kong is a great place for women. Jim says he's a very, very smart daughter who is living in the US, but she's got kids. And if she moves to Hong Kong, she could probably do even 3 times more. Now, I have a sister who has 3 kids, and she lives in Hong Kong. It's never deterred her from having a career as well as being a very responsible mother. So I think Hong Kong is a great place for women. Now, why did I forget to mention that in the first place? It's because I've been spoiled. I grew up in Hong Kong, I started working in Hong Kong, and I never felt any of the inconvenience that women in other countries may have and not being able to balance a life with a career. In Hong Kong, I think we're very fortunate, and we must not forget to inform other ladies who have the same kind of ambitions as nothing really wild. I mean, we just want to have a life like you guys, men. More, sorry. Never let anybody fool you to say that Hong Kong women are not aggressive. Now, there's a trend in the US on online education, and that is sending creative sparks flying all over the world. So, one of these companies is called Coursera, and it started by a Stanford professor who was born in Hong Kong. Well, forget about the part that he later moved to Singapore. But he was born in Hong Kong, and then he went to Stanford to teach. And he started Coursera. Now, somebody told me that Coursera is probably now valued at about $1 billion. So, how can we be of assistance to a company like Coursera? Well, of course, Coursera has now got about 2 million people. But there is a market that yet waits to be explored fully, and that is, of course, the China market. How can Hong Kong play a role in that? Well, many of you know that you access Coursera on YouTube. You cannot access YouTube in China, but you can definitely access YouTube in Hong Kong. So, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Hong Kong Chinese U, are perfect partners for Coursera to pilot and then leverage on Hong Kong's exposure for the mainland Chinese market. There are many, many more examples of this. And now let me switch over to multinational companies. Are we still relevant to the MNCs? Well, it seems that Boeing finds Hong Kong very useful because Boeing just committed to put their Aviation Services Research Center, who is obviously set to service the huge China market, because that's where Boeing is targeting its growth in the future. And Boeing has established this joint venture, this venture at Hong Kong PolyU. This is because Hong Kong has a lot of advantage, IP protection, experience in servicing aircraft. This is not something new. Hong Kong has a cluster of companies from Cathay to Hazel to Heiko, and we are in a perfect position to support growing Boeing's growth ambition. Now let me let the next speaker continue on how MNCs can take advantage of Hong Kong.
Thank you, Marjorie. Coursera is an online education company which needs the YouTube and free access in the internet, and Hong Kong is a great place. Now, you have heard too from Hong Kong. Now we have a multinational. Tell us about the Citibank story. Stephen.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ronnie. As you said, Ronnie, the Scots and the Brits have had been honoured to have a very long association for the last couple of 100 years in Hong Kong. You may not know that in 1842, when Hong Kong was leased to the British by the Chinese, it was leased as part of a drugs deal. It actually was leased as part of a drugs deal. Back in those days, this tells you about the fantastic trade capabilities of Hong Kong. Back in those days, the British were importing opium to China through Hong Kong. They were growing it in Britain, they were growing it in India, and they were importing it through Hong Kong. And an opium shipment was sieged as part of a drugs raid by the Chinese, and the British were not happy about it at all, entered prolonged negotiations, and in those negotiations, Hong Kong was leased to the British in 1842. Now, as William describes, for the last 170 years, Hong Kong has benefited uniquely from blending a Western view with an Asian view. And then with the handover back to what is now the world's largest growth economy in China in 1997, Hong Kong has continued to thrive in blending that unique global mindset. And our company, Citibank, I hope to share with you some things that you don't know about Citibank. I'm sure you know a lot of things about Citi in the US. Citi last year was our 200th anniversary, so a 200-year-old company. 111 years ago, Citibank came to Hong Kong. So the great vision at the start of the 20th century to go to 6 countries in Asia We have benefited from having this very, very long legacy in Asia. In fact, William's family, Lee and Fung, is our oldest client in Asia. We've been privileged to serve the Lee and Fung family through that entire history and continue to serve them today. But the conference is entitled Think Asia, Think Hong Kong. Thinking is very, very important. You're aware of the expression that thinking leads to action. When you repeat those actions, they become your habits. Your habits form your character, and your character forms your destiny. That's why we want to share our thinking with you about the way we think about Hong Kong and its role in Asia and its role in the world. On this first slide, you'll see some information that you may not be aware of. That in Citi, a fully recovered city, we had a very hard time in the global financial crisis, and as you know, we were grateful recipients of support in the US from the US government, and thankfully, we paid back to the US taxpayer a gain of 27%. But in Asia, Citi continued to be profitable right throughout the entire crisis. And in fact, in Q1 of this year, Citi was 30% of a fully recovered earnings Citibank in the world. What you may not know is that in Asia we have 60,000 employees. Across 18 countries, we have everything of Citibank: corporate, investment banking, private banking, retail banking, credit cards, and consumer lending. All of that is headquartered out of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is uniquely positioned to attract global talent. We need to have technology resources, risk resources, operations resources, client selling, marketing resources, all of which we can attract into Hong Kong as a truly global centre, a locus of talent across the world. And you can see this slide is a bit of a bragging slide in terms of the strength of the company in Asia after 111 years, really benefiting from the early vision of those who came out in 1902. But what about today? There are three trends in the world that we believe that we have to position our company to best serve our clients in Asia. And those trends are globalization, urbanization, and digitization. And Hong Kong really acts as an epicenter of these trends and helps us to be informed about how best to position our clients and advise them to tap into these trends. Let me share with you some of the facts behind these trends. Export share of GDP in 1990 was just 17%. Today in the world, export share is 26%. By 2030, it will be 33% of world output. So the increased trading, the pole-to-pole, EM to EM trading trend, which has been inexorably rising since 1990, is continuing and is knitting together the interests of all of us throughout the world. You heard earlier from the Honourable C.Y. Leung that Hong Kong was ranked number one in terms of transparency and open economy in 2012 and has consistently been ranked number one. So as a focal point for the trend of globalization, with half of the world's economy within a 4 or 5 hour flight, you can see why it's so important for us to have our headquarters there. But let's talk about urbanization. The last 30 years has seen the most rapid urbanization that the world has ever seen. More people have been raised out of poverty during that period than ever before. Just to give you some of the numbers, it took the US 100 years to urbanize half of its population. It took Japan 60 years to urbanize half its population. And it has taken China just 30 years to urbanize half of its population, and its population is 4 times larger than the United States. So when William talks about these 30-year chapters of Chinese development, and of the 30 years since Deng Xiaoping opened up China in 1979 was where China was making and selling to the world, the next 30 years will be about China buying from and consuming for the world. Digitization, perhaps the most dominant trend that has impacted all of our lives and has placed effectively a supercomputer capability in all of our hands and a smartphone is digitization. It truly has democratized technology and has given the power of choice, the ability to transact, the ability to communicate, the ability to socialize on a one-to-one basis. And Hong Kong is one of the best examples in the world of that. Mobile subscriptions in Hong Kong are 223% of the total population. That means there are 2.25 SIM cards for every single person in Hong Kong. This is a truly connected city with a truly global perspective. Now let me turn to a little part about the global companies. As Margie mentioned, multinational corporations. What inspired Citibank to go to Asia in 1902? Well, really, what it was part of the great American century. It was the US was the great emerging market at the start of the 20th century. You know, in the 19th century, the UK had been the world's largest economy, and it handed that mantle over to the United States as the US had this explosive growth throughout the 20th century. Citibank went to Asia to take those companies out into the world. And you know who they are. They're the great American companies that we still serve today. General Electric, IBM, Ford, General Motors, and then today, Oracle, Microsoft, Walmart, Apple. All of those companies we still serve today as they are seeding their business, both buying from and selling to the world economy. We've positioned our business today for the great Asian century, building on this product capability, building upon the pre-wiring of 100 countries that Citibank has connected to. We have our own people, we have our own licenses, we have our own technology and our own platforms in 100 countries of the world. And our goal, that was built over the 20th century, our goal is to take the Asian companies as we are today with Li and Fung and with let me mention some of give you some other examples here, because it's quite staggering the scale of these emerging market companies. I'm just going to give you, since 2001, the increase in market cap and a bunch of names that you probably are familiar with. PetroChina in 2001 was a $30 billion market cap company. Today, $245 billion. Samsung was $31 billion in 2001. Today, $183 billion. China Mobile was $66 billion. Today, $226 billion. Reliance Industries in India was a $7 billion company. Today, $47 billion. So you can see what is happening, this rebalancing of the world and the demand for goods and services that requires to connect into the world is truly enormous. Hong Kong. This slide shows you a little bit about our business in Hong Kong. You know, we have our headquarters there. I mentioned we have 60,000 employees across Asia. 5,000 of those employees are in Hong Kong. 1,200 of those employees come from 52 different countries, including the US. There's over 100 from the UK, over 100 from the US, over 100 from India, and 50 from Singapore. And of course, the vast majority of all of our employees across all of Asia are local Asian employees, because that gives us the local intellect, the local connectivity, and a talent pipeline for the new world. And that's why our investment is so critical at this time in Asia. We've brought many firsts. Citibank has brought many firsts to Hong Kong. I'll just give you a few of them. We were the first to provide 24-hour real-time foreign currency trading in Hong Kong. We were the first to bring touchscreen ATMs and 24-hour banking to Hong Kong. We were the first to launch Citi Gold, which is the wealth proposition in Asia. And that's particularly relevant today when you look at the massive expansion in wealth across Asia. This final slide tells you a little bit of this story. You probably read that last year, Asia Pacific became the world's largest high net worth population. There are over 3.4 million people in the Asia region today who have over $1 million to invest. The US is still the largest in total size in terms of the wealth wallet at $11.4 trillion. Asia is $10.7 trillion. So very, very close to the size of the overall wealth wallet of the United States. Last year, Hong Kong moved up from 4th position to be number 3 in the world's top capital of wealth management. Singapore, Switzerland, Hong Kong, London, and of course New York are the top 5. One other feature of Hong Kong, which our Chief Executive C.Y. Leung mentioned earlier, which is a critical advantage to Hong Kong, is that Hong Kong is frequently and has proven to be the pilot for the international, for the reform of financial services in China. The development of the RMB market, where Hong Kong, 80% of the renminbi trade settlement goes through Hong Kong. The dim sum, the deliciously entitled dim sum bond market, which was mentioned this morning, $40 billion of dim sum bonds already outstanding. Last year was $18 billion in renminbi bonds were raised. So as Hong Kong uniquely bridges the previous history of the world into the great Asian century, we invite all of you to think about Hong Kong, think about Asia, let that lead to your actions and your investment actions for your business. We want to help you. We have the employees, we have the capabilities there to make it feel like home for you. It's a fantastic city. I've lived there for the last 5 years. I've lived in Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, the US, the UK, and Hong Kong's the best. Thank you, Ronnie.
Stephen, you're the best. You know, it's amazing that in Citi, 30% of the global profit comes from Asia Pacific, and the headquarters is right here in Hong Kong. And by the way, I won't tell you how old is Stephen, very, very young, but it's truly amazing. Hong Kong is a city where everybody got a chance, even the young ones. Now, let me, Stephen, ask you one question. How do you use Hong Kong as a service center to the rest of Asia? You know, a lot. You saw on the film there earlier. You saw the vice chairman of GE, John Rice, right? He's based in Hong Kong. You saw the global chairman of KPMG. He is based in Hong Kong. So increasingly, companies in the old days have moved, say, into London, New York, are now finding Hong Kong, in particular in our part of the world, as not just the regional center, As our chief executive said, half of the 1,300 companies from America use Hong Kong as a regional hub. But even, ladies and gentlemen, the global headquarters of international companies are increasingly using Hong Kong. There must be a reason. Of course, there's another phenomenon, that is mainland Chinese companies are increasingly using Hong Kong because they're listed in Hong Kong. A huge, humongous company, technology company like Tencent, like Bank of China has a serious presence in Hong Kong. You'll hear from its CEO later, Mr. He Guangbei. And then you have a company like Soho, one of China's most successful real estate company, using Hong Kong as a headquarter because it's listed there. So, Stephen, tell us, how does Citi use Hong Kong to service the rest of the region?
In multiple areas, Ronnie, let me describe some of them. We have a full markets trading capability in Hong Kong. So we have, equities, equity derivatives, bonds, foreign currencies, real-time trading capability. We have the product management heads for our transaction services business. I mentioned that the ability to manage your cash in multiple countries of the world and to be able to manage your FX exposure and to hedge those risks, but also to pool all of your money and such that you can have an efficient balance sheet and minimize your funding requirements. All of that capability is managed out of Hong Kong. Our risk management, which effectively, when you're managing 18 economies, the balance sheets or the portfolios that reside in 18 different economies with lots of different assets, whether you're lending to small and medium enterprises or to multinational companies, that capability is all managed out of Hong Kong. So from a career development opportunity, we attract really the best talent in the world. Hong Kong has got tremendous universities, excellent educational credentials. We run a lot of HR training and development in Hong Kong. We bring other countries into it. And of course, there's practical reasons. A wonderful airport, fantastic airlines, great hotels, excellent restaurants. Hong Kong really works. It's a very, very efficient, work-centric place, and that helps you run your business from that hub.
Very good. We started 15 minutes late. We'll try to catch up a little, so we'll just take a few minutes with some of the questions from the floor. Here is one. What advice would you give to exporters, suppliers, and manufacturers who find themselves with a growing level of delinquent commercial debt, most of which is housed in U.S. and Europe? How do they go about securing payment from delinquent customers in the U.S. and Europe? Stephen or William, who of you like to take that one?
That's a very interesting question. Would you like to stand up and tell us who gave us that question? So I understand it correctly, this is clients who have delinquent customers in the Western world, Ronnie?
Yep.
Well, certainly you've got to be dealing with the global bank if you want to resolve those issues. And I think seriously, the question that I get, which is very, very like that, is, if you're going into a new country, how do you get a sense of the credit worthiness of people who are buying from you? The whole, how do you manage a whole supply chain? And I'll let William talk about that. But the key thing is local knowledge. All credit understanding is local knowledge. So you want to be dealing with local people in each country, local credit bureaus in each country. You want to understand the history and the profile of either the people or the corporations that you're dealing with. And of course, by definition, is local. So that's the way that you avoid getting caught by surprise. William?
Okay, let me just say that I empathize with that question because we're a fellow sufferer of this. I think the major problem has been that the companies in the major Western markets who are and then still are the major importers of product from Asia have been getting very efficient in their use of working capital. And they've actually been getting the supply side to supply a lot of the working capital. So supplier finance is actually a very big topic. And I think what it calls for is, as Stephen said, a knowledge of the credit situation. But I also would like to see more institutions being revived in the West, especially like something like factoring. These are people who really understand the credit market and they're willing to bridge this risk. And we do have, indigenously, of course, both China, Hong Kong, almost every exporting country has some kind of an export insurance scheme. But a lot of times that does not cover all our risk. So I think there's a white space there in terms of financial institutions willing to bridge that gap, and it's getting actually more and more serious. Despite the fact there seems to be so much money churning around, my customers are still, I think, pressing for credit supply from the supply side.
There are two questions here for William and for Margie. They both relate to consumer-based models. The question is a consumer-based model in China a sustainable one? Is it being done at the expense of global resource dwindling? Now, let me just add here that at the late 19th century, early 20th century, the biggest user of natural resource was England at the time of its industrial revolution. And in the 1910s and 1920s, the biggest user at that time was the United States, as the U.S. was growing. So it is nothing new in history. Now it's just China's turn that they are, using a lot of natural resources. That is just the way progression of growth is. So, however, the other aspect of the question is consumer-based society. Is that something sustainable, Margie?
I think that's a very... How much time do we have on this question?
1 minute.
I think it's important to build consumption in China. And that goes to a lot of the reforms that are currently taking place. For example, what we're trying to do is to raise the productivity of the individual workers so that they will become consumers. And I think we could do it. But invite me back in 3 years' time, and I will show you how fast the consumption is growing. Well, I can give you an example that has already happened. We have garment and textile workers. So we never expected that our factories would run out of car park space. That is a phenomenon. To show that the Chinese consumer, is really growing. So our concern now is air pollution and how to convince more of our workers who can afford a car to take a bike. So this is an interesting phenomenon.
Stephen?
Well, that's really a great question because it's one of the biggest questions that the world faces today. Can China succeed in remixing its economy towards greater consumption? And the thing that we look at in China, policy drives everything. Policy drives progress. We took our whole executive committee to Tsinghua University, and we were students for 2 days on Chinese public policy and studying the 12th five-year plan, which William referred to. How do you get consumers to spend more, save less, spend more? Well, they have to earn more. The 12th five-year plan actually includes an effective doubling of the wages of China. And that effective doubling in the five-year plan is designed to spur consumption. Another factor is confidence. We all know that confidence drives your decisions to spend. Now, confidence is based on your own internalization, your expectation of your future earnings. And pension entitlement, knowing that you will have a pension, is a very important part of that. In this 12th five-year plan in China, there is an effective doubling. That's another 150 million people who will have pension entitlement, from 150 to 300 million. So you can see that what's happening, the long-range planning, one of the most amazing things that has been part of this Chinese economic miracle is the ability to play a very long game. And that means making structural changes that impact upon the ability. We believe that it's sustainable. Citibank has launched its credit card business in China. We launched it last August. We're in a very fortunate position of being the only foreign bank who has a nationwide license, and that's because we believe that the consumption trends are real.
William?
Yeah, I think the short answer to the question is that yes, it is a major problem. As our previous Premier of China, Wen Jiabao, once said, you know, you have any problem and you multiply that by 1 billion people, it's a big problem. And the consumption in China will impact, you know, the world dramatically. It really means that you need to produce more. It really means that there's a redistribution of consumption, you know, and hopefully it'll be done through the price mechanism. Things will be expensive. I'm very concerned about food, for example, both food availability and food safety, you know, in China. But I think it's the straight answer is that yes, it is a huge problem. But on the other hand, I don't know how you deny the nation like China, you know, what they would like to have in terms of consumption. And then don't forget, following on the heels of China, you have another billion plus people, India, coming up the same consumption curve. So I think the world really has to be ready for that impact.
I think what Williams means, it's a problem. It doesn't mean that it is not growing. Rather, it is growing too fast. Ladies and gentlemen, I used to go to Japan and know how poor I am. Then I went to Dubai and I realized how poor I am. Ladies and gentlemen, now I go to mainland China and I know how poor I am. I think many of you in this country who do not travel regularly to mainland China do not understand that the amount of money that is in that system is truly amazing. Last evening, I had a great pleasure of having dinner with the chief executive of Hong Kong, Mr. C.Y. Leung, together with some of the leading citizens in this town, such as Rupert Murdoch, Charlie Rose, and many others. And we were talking about the tourism business, which later Peter Lam, the chair of our tourism board, will speak. 10 years ago, Hong Kong was the first city, probably, to realize that on a per capita spending basis, mainland Chinese outspend anybody, including the Swiss, the German, the Japanese, surely the Americans. We know that there are some issues that come with it, but as business people, we understand. We'll bear it, we'll take their money, they will change anyway. And after Hong Kong discovered that, then the rest of the world began to discover. Europe began to discover. It seems that America may be one of the slowest in this regard to wake up to realize that the Chinese, mainland Chinese tourists have the most money to spend, and they spend it. On a per capita basis, they outspend anybody. Savings rate high is just one of them. The growth rate of salary is extraordinarily high. I think something like 13, 15, 70% regularly. And then, of course, it's not just the salary earners. There's so many little businesses in the mainland of China that have sprung up in the last 20 years that are making really headways. And those people are making a lot of money. And that's why, sorry, Stephen, you're salivating over that business in the mainland of China, using Hong Kong as a hub, as a center. We, who are tapping into the consumption market in mainland China, recognize how humongous that market is. Anyway, because of time, I will just have a very quick question, the last one from Ernst & Young, asking the question that has actually been said already, but perhaps needs a little expansion. As an American company, we want to go to mainland China. Why do we need to go through Hong Kong? Why don't you answer that, William, and then we'll call it quit for this session.
I think again, as I try to say the way I structured my brief comments, is that you've got to look at Hong Kong either as a conduit, a complete conduit, depending on how big your company is. If you can only afford one hub, okay, then I think Hong Kong is the hub for Asia. If you can afford more than one hub in Asia, then perhaps, we have our friends in Singapore and other places you can look at. But if you have only basically one place in China that you want to go, I think Hong Kong would be the place. And if you have big resources and you want to go to several places in China, then I would suggest you look at city groups. As I try to say, if you look at city groups in China, there are about 10. There are about 10 city clusters in China. By far the biggest, the easiest to do business with is actually the Pearl River Delta hub, of which Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen are the major cities in that hub.
Let me end with just a very simple story. About 15 years ago, a major New York law firm came to me and said, we want to open in Hong Kong. Is it advisable? I gave him the advice, be very careful. Thank God that they did not listen to me. They opened an office in Hong Kong, and then opened many others in Asia Pacific, but using Hong Kong as a center. And a couple of years later, I saw the Citi partner for Asia. I said, how's business? He said, Ronnie, I'm so busy. So I said, you mean that you're making so much money? Well, I'm so busy. He's making a lot of money. So I said, where does the money come from? Surprise, surprise. Many of the businesses from South Asia, in India, a lot of those contracts are being done in Hong Kong. So it is not just the manufacturing, it's not just the financial service, it's also the professional service people. Hong Kong is really perhaps the best hub you can have in that part of the world. And I'm so lucky, so happy that I'm a Hong Konger and living in Hong Kong. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you, Mr. Chan, and all the speakers for the very productive discussion. We are now going to move on to our second session. And I'd like to ask Mr. Ronnie Chan to remain on stage while our first panel speakers return to their seats. And also a quick reminder to all of you that we've arranged business matching meetings with companies from Hong Kong and the Chinese mainland. Those who have made advance bookings for those business meetings, you can proceed directly to the respective rooms at your scheduled time. And if you haven't made a booking, don't worry. You can check the Hong Kong Trade Development Council counter for a walk-in appointment. That will, of course, take place later on this afternoon. Now, the topic of the second session is Going Out, the perspective from Chinese enterprises. We're delighted to have two renowned Chinese business leaders to share with us how they use Hong Kong as a platform for going out. I'd like to now invite Dr. Levin Zhu, President and CEO of China International Capital Corporation, along with Mr. He Guangbei, Vice Chairman and Chief Executive of Bank of China Hong Kong, to come on stage. Gentlemen.
Okay, now we go to another aspect of how Hong Kong is great. I used to say that in the 20th century, the best economic opportunity was probably in the first 10, 15 years of the 20th century, and the best place was probably the United States. Those were the days you go south, my son, go west, my son, go west. And then the second best opportunity in the 20th century was perhaps after the Second World War, the rebuilding. Now we're in the 21st century. The question, where are the best economic opportunities that mankind will see in the 21st century? Although we are only about, 12.5% of the century gone, I think most people have woken up already and agree with me that the best economic opportunities in the 21st century is most likely the rise of mainland China. In the last 20, 30 years, everybody was rushing into China, inbound FDI. Now, we're beginning to see the reverse. Before we know it, a lot of people still have yet to adjust mentally to the fact that China is poor, we need to help them, we need to bring technology, we need to bring capital and so forth. That's no doubt true, and it's still ongoing. But the reality is, perhaps another phenomenon has creeped up on us, creeped up on the world without our really realizing it. And that is major Chinese companies that have grown very fast, as Stephen Bird just said in the last session, are now finally finding themselves in the world stage. Just like 20, 30 years ago, many of us in the West have to get used to Japanese names, excellent companies from Japan, the Toyotas, Hitachi, Toshiba, and so forth. Today, we're beginning to see the same thing happening with mainland of China. Growing up in Hong Kong in the 1950s, to me, the definition of quality is made in America. And the definition of poor quality was made in Japan. That was the 1950s. By the 1980s and 1990s, nobody dare say that anything other than the best comes from Japan. Today, you and I may be laughing that made in China means poor quality. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we should learn a little from history. Just like Japan has risen tremendously, you cannot bar the possibility that 10, 12, 15 years later, many of the goods that are made in mainland China that have gone out into the rest of the world may indeed become the very best in the West. So here we have two gentlemen with us, truly leaders in their respective field. Both of them hail from the mainland of China. Levin have been still living in Beijing. Guangbei, Mr. He is the CEO of Bank of China in Hong Kong and the vice chairman of the group. He has been living in Hong Kong for the last, 10 years, close to it. And I would invite these two gentlemen to make some comments. And perhaps, Guangbei, I'll start with you. And later, Levin, when I go to you, can you also explain a little bit about your company, which is truly an amazing one? Now, Bank of China, everybody knows, is one of the top 10 largest banks in the world, one of the most profitable as well. Levin, your company is a new breed, I suppose, CICC. So tell us later. Okay, Mr. He, tell us about how are companies in mainland China going out, and how is your bank benefiting therefrom?
Can I sit here?
Sure, yeah, whatever you like.
Just to make a little difference, okay. Well, why the Chinese companies are going international? Why they're going out? Well, in the past, they were poor, they need capital, they raised a lot of funds from Hong Kong. As everybody know, 60% of FDIs actually in China actually was raised through Hong Kong. Hong Kong has played a very important role for China in fundraising. And then later on, they need managerial expertise. They also turned to Hong Kong. When they need capital, they went to Hong Kong. When they need, managerial expertise, corporate governance, that kind of thing, they also turn to Hong Kong. Because Hong Kong is the place where you have the world standards in sort of, corporate governance. And then when it comes to accounting rules, they get to Hong Kong. Legal, they get to Hong Kong. And then, for a certain period of time, for those technologies, labor-intensive processing technologies, they also turn to Hong Kong. But now, of course, many of the Chinese companies have changed. They have money, and they want larger market. They already test their products in China, and some of them actually have become world brand name. And they want the market. They want technology in the international market. And also, I think they actually want to expand into the international market in order to test in those unknown territory. But then the question is, when they first have this idea, normally many of them actually want to have establishments first in Hong Kong. The advantage of having establishment in Hong Kong, has been said so many times. But many of them, as far as I know, there are more than 4,000 Chinese companies having their rep offices or regional head offices or their head offices in Hong Kong. Why is that? Because they just want to get themselves familiar with the international market. They just want to accumulate some experience by having operation in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is the freest market in the world, a very simple tax structure, and very westernized legal system. The rule of law, of course, is fundamental. It's a basic in Hong Kong. So when you get your business done in Hong Kong, and perhaps once you get successful in your business, perhaps you can do it in any other parts of the world. For instance, take Bank of China, Hong Kong, for example. We, local bank, we have 260 branches in Hong Kong alone, and we have 14,000 employees. We have more than 700 ATMs. We are doing, full-fledged commercial banking activities in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is very, very competitive. Stephen Burke is one of the major competitors, and some of other competitors also sitting, down there. My experienced that if you can succeed in doing kind of business in Hong Kong in such a highly competitive environment, perhaps you can do so in any part of the world. So that's why many Chinese companies, when they want to expand internationally, they always use Hong Kong as a test ground to try their ability to accumulate experience, to prepare themselves for the true expansion into the outside world. Plus, Hong Kong is a financial center. When they come to Hong Kong, when they need the funds to support their international activities, they can always do so, either in Hong Kong dollars, in US dollars, or in RMB. For instance, we managed to raise huge amount of funds for major Chinese companies for their M&A activity internationally, and major M&A activities. And we, of course, we're able to also provide advisory to them as to, what they need to do in other parts of the world. So Hong Kong has played a very, very important role to a lot of Chinese companies. And plus, Hong Kong actually, with very simple tax structure, many of the Chinese companies have their regional hub, regional head offices located in Hong Kong, have their businesses booked in Hong Kong in order to enjoy low taxation in Hong Kong. And that actually is a big advantage to many, and as you know, Chinese tax rate is a lot higher than that in Hong Kong, both corporate and a salary tax. As our CE just mentioned, corporate income tax is about 16.5%, salary tax is about 15%, and so it's very easy actually for you to find a talent in Hong Kong. And Chinese people they would love to go and live in Hong Kong because Hong Kong is such an interesting mixture. Everybody goes to Hong Kong and you feel at ease. I'm a Chinese. I'm not local honky. I hope it's a good term. I'm not local honky, but I went to Hong Kong about 10 years ago. I felt very much at ease because you don't have to. Unlike in some other places, you don't have to invite government officials to dinners in order to persuade them to get approval. Is that so? It's very easy to do business in Hong Kong. The business environment, Hong Kong government is very pro-business. They have procedures and very transparent procedures to follow. Once you know the procedures and rules, you can do business very easily. You don't really have to knock on their doors, beg them, hey, want to do it like this and that, and give us approval. It's unlike in other parts of the world, especially unlike in Mainland. So Hong Kong, it's very, very easygoing place and very friendly to business. So that's another reason why many Chinese enterprises, big and small, they will come to Hong Kong and set up their business first, and then, use Hong Kong as a springboard for their international expansion. The other thing actually is the RMB business. RMB business actually is expanding very fast in Hong Kong, and we actually is the true offshore RMB center in the world, and we handle about 70 to 80% of the cross-border trade settlements globally. And that also, is attractive to Chinese companies. Some of them, when they expand internationally, they want to expand. They want the international markets. They want to sell their goods to those international markets. And by using Hong Kong to get themselves familiar with the local RMB market, they'll be able to raise RMB funds. They'll also be able to use the proceeds in the international market. For instance, we have come across a lot of examples where the Chinese companies raise RMB in Hong Kong and use the proceeds of their bond issues or syndications in the international market to make investment there. And then, of course, the projects that is up in those foreign countries, or in turn, using the RMB to import products from this Chinese company. So we were able to actually create the circle of RMB this RMB circulation through trade and through project investment, things like that. So, there are many examples that Hong Kong is playing a very important role, a major role for the Chinese companies who's willing to expand internationally. And I think, just in order to allow Levin to speak out, so I just stop here and will be willing to take questions from you later on.
Robert, let me ask you a very basic question first, because I suspect that some in the audience may not be as familiar. They always worry about the RMB. Can they come in and out of mainland China? Is it that easy? Has it been improving the situation? Is that something to worry about? Money that goes in that as capital cannot come out, and that kind of issues. RMB flowing across the border.
By definition, if you have trade, current account items, be it service-related or real commodity trade, if you provide service to China or buy commodities, from China, and against that kind of background, there's no restrictions whatsoever. You can use RMB to settle service and the trades using RMB. But capital account, there is still certain restrictions, but the Chinese authorities is gradually removing those restrictions. But now there's an offshore and onshore market. The difference actually is on the offshore market, there's no restriction whatsoever. You can do trade, you can do trade settlement, you can do foreign exchange, you can do money market, you can do delicious dim sum bond, you can do a lot of other things actually, just like US dollar and euro and other major currencies in the offshore market. But the onshore is subject to capital control. So when it comes to the cross-border transactions, capital account item, perhaps you need approval from the local authority. Trade-related, none whatsoever. So for Chinese companies and foreign companies to do business with China, for Chinese companies expanding internationally, sometimes they would rather raise funds in the onshore market, or, very often they want to do it in the offshore market because the rates in the offshore market is lower. The funding rate in the offshore market is lower than the onshore market. In other words, it's less expensive to borrow in the offshore market than the onshore market.
I just add one word, that is, a lot of people think that because China is not as legalistic as in the West, and hence when you get money go in and out, you can be a little lax. That is really where a lot of the downfall is. As long as you abide by the rules and do it right every step of the way, that's really not an issue for most general business practices. Okay, Levin, you are not a commercial bank. You are really one of the first so-called investment bank that started in China. So that means you stand in the middle of transactions. Transaction in, transaction out. You are really in the middle. You see a lot of these things. Tell us something about CICC, and then tell us about your industry and how you see the China companies using Hong Kong to go out to the rest of the world. 11-2.
Yeah. But actually, before I answer your question, I really can't help thinking in terms of the history. When this morning we were talking about New York, now we're here at the Big Apple at New York City, and we talk about Hong Kong. And in history terms, New York used to be the gateway from the old world to the new world. And Hong Kong also for 100-some years have been practically been the gateway of the Asian China to the modern world. Then you can see the developments. And of course, you can also help, thinking about what's the status of the development. About 100 years ago, New York, U.S., it was, GDP, as I checked a little bit. It was around $5,000 in today's term. And now it's 50,000. So it's 10 times over about 100 years. And what about China? China, before 100 years ago, it was the China Revolution. It was the Xinhai Revolution that overthrew the last dynasty, which lasted about, the dynasties in China lasted about 2,000 years. And within that short 100 year, from then to now, China obviously have been making some progresses. And we were lucky, in about 20 years ago, CICC set up in China as one of the first joint venture investment bank in China that started to do helping the Chinese companies to go abroad. The first one was the China Telecom, then now the China Mobile, which has about 800 million users, mobile users. So that's an example, and in fact, the CICC was formed in 1995, and then in 1997 it set up its Hong Kong office, and since then we use the Hong Kong office really as our staging place for launching the IPOs of the leading Chinese companies in various industries for the last 17 years. So that's kind of a little experience, and I can help think about this geography. After all, Hong Kong, both historically as the gateway and also now as a convenient place, because Hong Kong has been so active, in business and very innovative at reinvent themselves every time there's a change in the development. There's a new opportunities emerging. So that's something, even as a mainlander, I'm sort of is very fond of the Hong Kong people in this place. So within about 5-hour circle from Hong Kong, you can reach most of the Asian cities, which I think is certainly will be the new center of development for this century. There's 4 billion people in Asia. If excluding China and India as the biggest one, there's still 1.4 billion people, which is in the development. And Hong Kong is certainly as a business, a sort of vital, pivotal place for business, for trade, for finance, and for investment within this emerging zone of Asian development. So that's, I think I can help to think about the Hong Kong, in the coming age. And think about China now is only like per capita GDP is only like 1/10 of the U.S. 2011, Chinese per capita GDP is about 5,000, which is about 100 years ago in the U.S. But think about the potential and the world trade. In the last decade, the world trade almost tripled. I think this is like our friend from Citibank mentioned that the globalization, it is in the way. And urbanization, of course, that will drive the economic development and drive the consumptions. As people still have some doubt that whether the consumption is true in China, I have to say actually it's very low now. Even the dispensable income is a smaller percentage of the GDP, per capita GDP. In contrast, in the U.S., the dispensable income is about 78% of the per capita GDP. So if you think in the longer term, in the 5 years, 10 years term, the potential is tremendous. Of all the difficulties, the adjustment needed, the development is still going with strong forces.
Levin, tell us, you have been around for 18 years, CICC. Has the business changed? You have opened in Hong Kong now for 16 years. Has the kind of businesses that you see over the last 16 years changed?
Yeah, always changes. But I think, mostly the last 15 years we see is the development of the Chinese, companies, along with Chinese open up social economic development, even though with some regret that the reform was not as strong as it used to be. But still now we get the opportunity to regenerate the vigor of the reform. And after all, this is 1 billion plus people vying for the improvement of their lives, the standard of living, and improve the lives for their children. So the growth, the will to grow is so strong.
Isn't it true that in the old days, CICC did a lot of work for foreign companies entering into China? Now, are you seeing the reverse? Are there a lot of Chinese companies going overseas? Are you in the traffic flow?
It's not the one way or the other. It's still we see the global companies investing heavily in China in the billions range continuously, and of course there's some Chinese companies are coming out for trying to find some investment. I think there's a lot of them have certain rationales. As the economy globalizes, there's natural for business to find there's synergies, there's benefits to be achieved by cooperating or joining hands or whatever way of doing it. But actually the Chinese investment coming out is only at the very early stage. It's sort of a tentative, experimental. It's not necessarily everything is right. But if you are willing to see over a longer time, then you realize there's a natural and fundamental growth in the direction.
Okay, there's a couple of questions here. One, how open is Hong Kong's financial market compared to mainland China and compared to the United States? Wang Bei.
That's a very big question. How open?
Yeah.
Very open.
Good.
Yeah, I can say.
Compared to the United States?
Compared to China, compared to the United States. I'm sorry to say so.
No, you don't have to be sorry. I'm happy to say that.
Yeah, I think it's the easiest place. Maybe you can do, almost feel like you can do it in half hour if you were prepared.
I think that listen carefully to what the two gentlemen have said. Hong Kong is not only more open than the mainland of China, which is understandable. And Kwok, you come from mainland China, Bank of China and mainland, you know what it is like. But we are also more open.
And I work in the States.
You work in the United States
for a while, yes.
But to be fair, after all, other places are big, and you have to careful compare and balance everything. So it's very difficult. So this is good to be small, right?
We're smaller. We admit that. How large and active are Hong Kong's capital market? How large and active are Hong Kong's capital markets?
Levin, you have any idea about the size of the stock exchange?
Right.
Levin always has good numbers.
Yeah, I think it's like in the top 5 centers of all the new capital raised, like an IPO type. Like New York, London, Hong Kong will be in the last 5 years is constantly sort of a stable top 3 within top 5.
How easy is it for small businesses to access credit in Hong Kong? Mr. He, if I were a small guy walk into your bank, how easy it is for me to get a loan?
Well, it's not very easy. Well, just joking. Well, in fact, if you ask Hong Kong banks, most of the local banks, they have a large portfolio of SME lendings. And it's one of their major businesses, including my friends in the banking sector. Many of them actually have a large portfolio of SME lending. And in fact, in Hong Kong, the banks have developed a system or formula or scorecard. As long as, if they know the business, they know the individual, the owner of the business well enough, and when they apply for credit, they can get onto the system to provide information, and they can get approval in principle within 1 day. So, because Hong Kong actually, certainly you have large property developers, you have huge companies, you have trade companies and Chinese ones, but at the same time, those small, medium-sized companies actually are very, very important to the Hong Kong economy. So they're very active in the local market. And that's why, we also, as banks in Hong Kong, also provide a variety of services to them so that, provide better environment for them to do business in Hong Kong. And I would say it's relatively easy for SMEs to get credit in Hong Kong.
Okay, here's another one. It is addressed to Mr. Ho. Do Chinese companies operating in Hong Kong have an advantage, a competitive advantage over the international corporations such as Citibank? Do you get special deals in Hong Kong? Bank of China, you're one of the 3 no-issuing banks. Are you given special privilege that Stephen Bird would love to have?
Let me put it this way. Say 10 years ago, we had disadvantage versus some of the international banks.
Disadvantaged.
Because
Stephen,
we didn't have... Stephen, where? Stephen is gone. That's true, because we did not have the expertise in terms of investment banking activities, in terms of private banking services, cash management, life insurance, and things like that. But we've caught up. Sorry, Stephen. We tried very hard in the last 10 years to catch up with the international best practices, both in terms of products, services, and corporate governance. And I think because of that, we're able to win more business from the state-owned companies in China. So if you say we do have certain advantage, I say we won it.
Okay. Let me comment on that. Hong Kong is such a level playing field that we really don't care where you come from. It is the easiest place to do business, and hence we just do not discriminate against anybody. As long as your money is clean, we treat you well.
It's always the terms and conditions, actually. It's always the price and quality of service. If you don't have the similar quality of service, it's difficult for you to compete in the local market in Hong Kong, whoever the customer is.
I agree. In the old days, I would never use Bank of China. The technology wasn't that good yet, and the service wasn't that good.
And you should use it more, actually.
Now they're very, very good. Even Mr. He hosted a wonderful lunch for me a couple of weeks ago. Stephen Bird, you haven't hosted me. No, it's okay. Okay, here's a question for Levin. What is the current state of institutional investors from mainland China? Now, most people don't ask that question. This is somebody who knows something. Huh? We talk about institutional investors in the West. But what about the condition of what's the current state of the institutional investors from mainland China? That's the first half. The second half is, are they seeking opportunities in the United States? But let's talk about the current state first.
Yes, I think that there definitely is improving, but their scale is still too small. Like the publicly raised fund management, I think it's about something like 1/10 of the market. So the investment in terms of capital market investment in China is still mostly retail, 80-90%. But institutionalization is increasing. Although I think there are still some challenges similar to any developing countries. You don't have the history, now you have to learn these skills, and you have to, be good enough, to really establish yourself. And so this is kind of a still ongoing development, and I think currently there are also some thinking about investing in, diversifying into the capital markets investments in such as U.S. and U.K., the international market for them, which I think makes sense.
Let me add a personal note. For the last 20 years, my company, Hang Lung, which is publicly listed, we go to New York and London every year to talk to institutional investors. Then we added Singapore. Of course, Hong Kong has a big center too. We always talk to them in Hong Kong. But also we added Singapore. Then later we added the Middle East. We go to Abu Dhabi, we go to Dubai, we go to even Qatar and so forth. Recently, just last year, my company instituted something new. That is, we're sending our investor relations people to mainland of China. So at least once or twice a year, we go to mainland of China, in particular Beijing and Shanghai, because they are increasingly somehow, some way, holding shares in my company, and so we have to go and kowtow. Guangbei. We used to only come to this town and London to kowtow.
They are shareholders, of course you need to kowtow to them. Say about 15 years ago, institutional investor was just merely a concept in China. And there was hardly anything, actually. There was no institutional investor, even though there were some life insurance companies that need investment, even though there's some, safe managing foreign exchange reserves, they need to manage their investment. But in general, just the institutional investors, like in the United States and the UK, there was none in China. But now, you have life insurance companies, you have CIC, you have a lot of fund management companies, because wealth management business is growing very fast in China. So many of them actually use fund management companies to run their investments. So that's why now we have this QFII, qualified foreign institutional investor, that kind of thing actually, to allow foreign qualified institutional investors to make investment in China. At the same time, there's also QD, qualified domestic institutional investors. So now, institutional investor, it's a huge market in China, but looking for various kinds of business, including international assets. Because they now mostly do their investment in China. But of course, I'm sure there's a need on that side to put in their portfolio some of the international assets for the benefits of their investors.
Just consider this. Mainland China has about 3+ trillion US dollars of foreign reserves. Private saving is probably 5 trillion, 4-5 trillion US dollars. Corporate saving is another 5 trillion US roughly. So when you put them all up together, you're talking about 13, 14 trillion US dollars. And that money sooner or later needs to go somewhere. And right now, as Levin mentioned, that the regulation perhaps still need to evolve further. But if you go in by the time that's all done, it's perhaps too late. And so now, I think many of the financial service industries around the world are beginning to realize that that's where the money is. When you've got about 13, 14 trillion US dollars that are investable, some of them sooner or later, that is a humongous market. So here's a question. We have to end very soon. There's a question. How is the relationship, economic relationship between Hong Kong and the BRIC countries? Now, obviously, it won't be Hong Kong and the BRIC countries, Russia, Brazil, and Russia, and Indonesia, and so forth, India, and so forth. But really, mainland Chinese companies interacting with the BRIC countries, perhaps using Hong Kong. You see those kind of activities going on?
Hong Kong versus BRIC countries. Very limited, actually, from my own experience. Of course, we do a lot of trade with Russia through Hong Kong. And when the Russian company actually became listed in Hong Kong Stock Exchange, perhaps that's sort of, economic exchange between Hong Kong and BRIC countries. But in fact, when I think more, perhaps there are more and more examples. For instance, Brazil, a lot of trades through Hong Kong, between Brazil and China, South Africa, the same thing. So there's an active role for Hong Kong to play, to facilitate trade and investment between mainland China and the other BRIC countries.
Well, anyway, you have anything to add, Lemon? No? Okay, because of the time, we really have to call it quit. We still have a few questions here. Unfortunately, we do not have time for it. But I'm just suffice to say that Hong Kong is a small place. We service everybody. We used to service America, we still do. We used to service Europe, we still do. And now we have another big client, that is mainland of China. And we service everybody, and in the process, we get a lot of economic benefit out of it. And so for those of you who are interested in the mainland of China market, I can think of no better place than to come first to Hong Kong, and then that's a place you can get the talent, you can get even the capital resources, as well as a lot of expertise. Hong Kong TDC has perhaps one of the best database on doing business in mainland of China. So if you are interested in knowing any province, any city, any industry in the mainland of China, contact one of the persons at the Hong Kong TDC Trade Development Council. They'll be able to help you. Thank you very much. A round of applause for Mr. Ho and Mr. Zhu.